Hi, I'm Terry Bouricius. I'm a recovering politician. I spent 20 years as a lawmaker. I was first elected back in 1981 with Bernie Sanders when he's elected mayor of Burlington, Vermont. I was elected to the city council, served 10 years in the city council, including a term as president. And then I got elected to the state legislature, where I served in the House of Representatives for another 10 years. As a legislator, I saw from the inside how our representative system doesn't really work very representatively. And I have a very clear memory of being on a committee dealing with a landlord-tenant bill, the rights and responsibilities of landlords and tenants. And I noticed that my committee members, the other committee members, were not really paying close attention to certain witnesses, people who were, in that particular case, advocating for the rights of tenants. And after the witnesses were done, I asked the other members of the committee, who here is a tenant? Nobody on the committee was a tenant. I wasn't anymore. I had recently purchased a house with my wife. And so I started doing an informal survey of House members throughout the building. And I didn't get to everybody, but I got to a large percentage of legislators. I only found one renter out of the 150 members of the House. Now, about a third of Vermonters are renters. So I realized this body is not representative of the people of Vermont. I wonder how the deliberation would have gone differently if a third of the members of my committee were renters. Because the fact is, there were plenty of landlords in the legislature, but only, as far as I could tell, one renter. So I realized right then and there that this was not a representative chamber. And I jokingly said, you know, you could pick 150 people out of the phone book and do a better job of representing Vermont. And after I left the legislature, after 20 years in elective office, I worked for a national organization working on election reform. I worked with legislatures from Maine, literally from Maine to Alaska. And in that work as a policy analyst on election reform, I gave testimony to British Columbia's Citizens' Assembly. Now, this was quite eye-opening. The Citizens' Assembly in British Columbia was charged with designing a new voting system for the province. And it was constructed by having one man and one woman randomly selected from each of the districts where people were elected from. So it was randomly selected, like a jury, sort of. And I gave testimony on what I thought they should do for reforming their voting method. But by the end of the process, I had quite a revelation. I realized that this is exactly how democracy should be functioning. These were ordinary people who were learning all kinds of details, having deliberation, taking input from all kinds of experts, weighing things and coming to conclusions. Now, this model of having ordinary people in a deliberative body learning deeply about issues and then making policy, I came to realize that is what democracy should be about. And from that point on, that was around 2004, 2005, I've been working on democratic lotteries as a superior tool for running a democracy. Democracy really needs to be about self-rule, not about consent of the governed. There's a fundamental difference between those two concepts. Self-rule means that ordinary people are taking turns deciding things on behalf of their society. Consent of the governed means we get to vote every now and then, every couple of years, on which team of oligarchs will let rule over us. And quite frankly, that's not my idea of a democracy, and it was not the idea of democracy in ancient Athens. In ancient Athens, they used elections for very few things. They almost were non-existent. So this concept of a democratic lottery, selecting people to deliberate and make laws, is the root of democracy. What we have now, and is often referred to as democracy, is an oligarchy. It's an elected oligarchy. Now, that term might sound like I'm being hyperbolic, but political scientists, when you have a handful of people making the laws for everybody else, that's the definition of an oligarchy. So this model of selecting ordinary people to serve on deliberative bodies to tackle tough issues and either make recommendations to lawmakers, make recommendations to referendum, or to actually adopt the laws themselves is a model which is mushrooming all over the world. There have been over 600 citizens' assemblies of randomly selected ordinary citizens in countries from Australia, throughout Europe, Brazil, Japan. This is a model which is blowing up all over the world, except in the United States. There are very few that have gone on in the United States. There have been a few, but we are so far behind the rest of the world in this fundamental democratic reform. My hope is that the book that I've written can help change that. Now, when people first hear the idea of ordinary people randomly selected making laws, they might giggle and laugh. But when you explain the issue in detail and cover the issues of competence and expert witnesses and the fact that they're not beholden to special interests and campaign donors, people tend to start nodding their head, because the fact is that's what democracy is actually about.